Part 1. When night fell on the frontier, cowboys didn't crawl into cozy bunks. They crawled into their fears. There were no cabins, no tents, no doors to lock, no walls to shield the wind. Just you, your saddle for a pillow, your blanket for warmth, and the dirt for a bed. And under that dirt, life, rattlesnakes, scorpions, tarantulas, ants that bit harder than most men. Creatures that saw your bedroll not as a boundary, but as an invitation. Cowboys knew the risks. They didn't talk about them much, but they knew every time you unrolled your bedding, you risked rolling over something that didn't want company. And on the plains, warnings were rare. You didn't hear the rattle until it was too late. You didn't feel the sting until the fire spread through your leg. Still, you laid down, because after 14 hours in the saddle, with sunburnt skin and dust in your teeth, you didn't care what crawled near you. You cared about closing your eyes, at least for a while. They had no bug spray, no thick tents, just oilskin blankets and whatever luck the West gave them that night. Some cowboys wrapped rawhide straps around their boots and used them as pillow barricades. Others made little stone circles around their bedrolls, hoping it would stop critters. It didn't. The smart ones shook out their boots every morning, not for dust, for movement. You didn't put your foot in blindly. You turned the boot upside down, smacked it twice, and waited. If something slid out, you let it go. If it didn't, you waited longer. One cowboy in Arizona claimed he found a scorpion under his hat 2 nights in a row. Said he started sleeping with it tied to his saddle horn, just in case it wanted a third. Another swore he felt something crawling inside his sleeve while he was half asleep. He didn't scream. He just rolled the other way and hoped it crawled back out. It did. Probably. There was no panic, no shrieking, just that cold realization: out here, you're not on top of the food chain. You're just part of the night. The ground itself was a gamble. You wanted soft earth, but not too soft, or it might be an old burrow. You looked for dry spots, but not too dry, or it might be infested with fire ants. Sleeping near a rock gave you wind cover, but snakes liked rocks too. Open flat ground was safest, but coldest, and the cold could kill you faster than a snake ever would. So you picked your poison. Some men slept sitting up, leaning against their saddles, wrapped in wool, knife in hand, not because they expected to use it, but because holding something made them feel a little less helpless. Others just drank enough to fall asleep fast and hope nothing got them before morning. The stories passed from one cowhand to another were half truth, half warning, like the one about the man who used his saddle blanket as cover one night and found a rattlesnake curled under it come morning. He didn't get bit, but he slept in a tree for the next 3 nights, saddle and all. Or the drover who claimed he once woke up with a scorpion on his cheek, too scared to move. He held his breath for 10 minutes, said it crawled away eventually. Bored of the standoff. No one knew if these tales were true, but nobody wanted to find out firsthand. Sleep wasn't restful. It was cautious. You drifted off with one eye half open, ears tuned to every crunch of grass, every shift in the dirt. You didn't dream of home or love or winning poker hands. You dreamed of quiet, the kind where nothing crawled across your chest in the dark. The lucky ones only had to deal with insects. The unlucky ones, well, they didn't talk much about it, or at all. Still, every cowboy rolled out his bedroll each night, because there wasn't a choice. The trail didn't care if you were tired or scared. Come morning, you were expected to ride, swollen ankle or not, bad dreams or not. And if something did crawl in beside you overnight, you just made room. Next time, we'll dig deeper into what happened when those nights went wrong, when bites swelled, when legs gave out, and when cowboys had to treat the worst of the wild with nothing but whiskey and grit. Because in the Wild West, surviving the night was just the beginning. Part 2. No cowboy ever planned for the bite. They planned for blisters, bruises, saddle rash, but not the sudden heat in your leg at 3 a.m. The sharp jolt that ripped through the dark like lightning through dry brush. That was the moment everything changed. When the land reminded you it didn't care who you were or how tough you thought you'd been. Some bites were minor, swollen ankles, fingers that turned red and stayed puffy for days. Others were worse. You'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering, body going cold even while your leg burned like fire. You didn't scream. Not out there. Screaming attracted more trouble than it solved. The only doctor on the trail was pain and whiskey. That's what they used, not because it worked, but because it was all they had. A flask of vodka was poured down the throat and across the wound. Then came the waiting. You didn't sleep after that. You didn't speak much either. You just hoped your body was tougher than whatever bit you. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was and single quotes t. The men around you didn't say much. Maybe a nod. Maybe they handed you the bottle without asking. Cowboys weren't trained to comfort, just to endure. If you could still stand in the morning, you kept riding. If not, someone loaded you onto a mule. If even that was too much, they left you with water, firewood, and a blanket, and promised to come back if they could. Most times, they meant it. Sometimes, they couldn't. Out there, a delay could mean losing. Losing cattle meant losing your job. That meant no pay. And no pay meant no food, no horse, no way home. So every man made peace with the same fact: you ride until you can't. And when you can't, you hope you've got more luck than venom in your blood. Scorpions were worse in the hot months. They didn't bite, they stung. A flash of pain, like glass driving into the skin. Some were small, barely the size of a coin. Others were big enough to hear when they moved across dry leaves. They liked to hide in boots, under hats, inside rolled-up shirts. You learned fast, nothing you owned was ever truly yours. At night, it belonged to the land. Tarantulas, they weren't. Dangerous, but they didn't need to be. The sight of one crawling across your blanket at midnight was enough to make even the steadiest hand tremble. And then there were centipedes, long, silent, and fast. You never saw them until they were already on you. The worst part wasn't the bite. It was the not knowing. Was the swelling bad? Was the numbness supposed to spread that far? Did the fever mean you were healing or fading? There was no one to ask. No books, no medicine. Just guesses and stories and silence. Some cowboys carried home remedies. Tobacco juice, bear grease, poultices made from herbs they only half remembered the names of. None of it was reliable, but it gave you something to do while you waited. And waiting was all you had. They'd wrap the leg in damp cloth, sit you near the fire, feed you beans you couldn't stomach. And if you started muttering nonsense, they just nodded and kept watch. Because if you made it through the night, that was a victory. A small, painful, half-delirious victory, but a victory nonetheless. In the morning, you checked the damage. Some could walk, some limped, some couldn't move at all. But the trail didn't stop, so neither did you. And every cowboy who survived a bite carried that lesson forward, not as a story, but as a shadow. A small voice that reminded him every time he unrolled his bedroll. This might be the night. Something rolls in with you. Because on the frontier, sleep wasn't safety. It was permission, given by the land, and taken away just as fast. Next, we'll look at the tricks, rituals, and desperate habits cowboys used to keep the critters out, and the nightmares at bay. From bedroll rings to superstition, you'll see what men did when the dark got too loud. Part 3. Cowboys weren't fools. They couldn't change the West, but they learned how to live with it, or at least, how to sleep beside it. They developed tricks, little rituals, things that didn't guarantee safety, but made them feel like they weren't just lying down for the night like a meal on a plate. One of the oldest, the rope circle. You'd uncoil your lasso and lay it in a full circle around your bedroll. Some said snakes wouldn't cross it. Something about the feel, the texture. No one really knew why or if it worked, but they did it anyway. If you didn't have rope, you used stones, a ring of pebbles around your sleeping spot. Was it protection or just a distraction? Didn't matter. You slept better for it. Another method, fire. A small flame nearby wasn't just for warmth, it was for visibility. If something slithered close, at least you'd see it. Maybe just enough light to catch a movement without giving yourself away to every coyote in the county. But fire had its own dangers. Once, a man woke up to find his blanket smoldering. He'd rolled too close. The others just laughed and handed him a new one. That was the trade-off. Burn or bite. Pick your misery. Some cowboys went further. They built little beds with branches, raised off the ground, if only by a few inches. Not enough to stop anything serious, but maybe enough to feel like you were a little less exposed. A few slept inside their saddles, curled around them like shields. It wasn't comfortable, but nothing out there was. One old-timer was known for sleeping with a cast-iron skillet at his side, not for cooking, for swatting. Claimed he once knocked a snake to feed into the air before sunrise. Nobody believed him, but he brought the skillet anyway. And then there was salt. Some men carried pouches of it and sprinkled it around their bedroll, said it kept things away. Didn't matter if it was true. On the trail, belief was half the battle. Superstition ran strong in the open country. Never sleep with your feet pointed toward the wind. It invited bad dreams. Never whistle at night. Calls the crawlers. Always shake your hat twice, never once. Were these real rules? Who knows? But they gave men something to hold on to. In a place where the ground moved, the air bit, and the silence had teeth, any sense of control was gold. Some cowboys developed the habit of sleeping half awake, not truly asleep, not fully alert, just in that space between, enough to rest the body, but not let the mind drift too far. It wasn't healthy, but it kept them breathing. Others solved it another way. They drank, not enough to pass out, just enough to stop, carrying what was crawling near their leg. A warm gut could do what no superstition ever could, let you forget that the ground beneath you was alive. It wasn't just the critters, it was the cold, the wind, the sudden noises, cattle shifting nearby, coyotes yipping, hooves in the dark that weren't supposed to be there, and always the feeling that something out there was watching. Sleep was survival, but it was also surrender. You had to trust that the ground would keep still, that your blanket was enough, that your friends wouldn't move on without you. And even if you believed all that, you still checked your boots in the morning, because no matter how many circles you drew or charms you carried, the West never gave promises, only chances. In the final part, we'll ride into the worst of it: storms, floods, stampedes, and what happened when a cowboy had nowhere to sleep at all, when even the dirt turned against him, and the only shelter left was his own stubborn part. For sometimes, even the ground wasn't an option. There were nights when cowboys didn't get to unroll their bedrolls, nights when the storm hit faster than they could find cover, when the thunder rolled across the plains like an angry drum, and the rain fell sideways hard enough to sting. Those nights, sleep wasn't about fear of scorpions or snakes. It was about finding anything that might keep you dry or at least breathing. You might wedge yourself between two rocks, crawl under the wagon, use your saddle as a roof, and pray the wind didn't take it. Blankets soaked through in minutes, fire gone, bedroll a soggy mess. You didn't sleep, you endured. Then came the stampedes, the worst kind of night terror. Thousands of hooves pounding through the dark. One spooked steer could turn into 100, then 1,000, charging blind. There was no warning, just a rising thunder under your ribs. You leapt up, no matter how tired, no matter how wet. Grabbed your boots, your hat, maybe your horse. If you were lucky, some cowboys just dove flat and prayed they weren't in the path. They say one man survived a stampede by crawling into a shallow wash and staying there, while the herd passed over him. When they pulled him out at dawn, he was shaking and covered in hoofprints, but alive. Barely. And then there were floods. The West might be dry 9 months of the year, but when it rained, royos that looked like harmless ditches turned into rivers in minutes. Cowboys who'd set camp in a dry creek bed went to sleep thinking they were smart. By midnight, their blankets were floating. One man tied his bedroll to a tree so he wouldn't drift. Another climbed on top of his horse and stayed there all night, soaked to the bone, teeth chattering. These weren't just bad nights, they were reminders that out here, nature didn't need claws or venom to ruin you. It only needed time. Worst of all were the nights with nothing. No rain, no wind, no cattle, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if the world forgot you. You'd lie there, eyes open, staring at a sky so big it made you feel like an insect. The stars cold, distant, uncaring, the fire dead, the flask empty. And in that silence, your mind filled the space. With memories, with regrets, with things you never said to the brother you left behind, with the girl back home you promised you'd write, with the question you never dared ask. Is this all there is? Sleep was supposed to be rest. Out here, it was survival. A fragile deal made with a world that never promised anything. You laid your head down knowing it might be your last night, that something could crawl, or sting, or trample, or simply not stop walking, and that would be the end. And yet, cowboys kept doing it. Night after night, they laid on the earth, stared up at the stars, and closed their eyes, not because it was safe, but because there was no other way. That's what made them cowboys. Not just the riding, not just the guns, but the fact that they could sleep in a world that wanted to bite them, and still wake up ready to ride again. Because in the Wild West, rest wasn't comfort. It was courage.